is the chairman's report. And I don't have anything to say that I didn't say yesterday, other than we need to do the commission evaluation. And who's got the materials to pass around?
We were going to pass materials tonight, we had some notes for that.
Say that again?
We didn't do materials to pass, right? We had a summary of the notes.
Okay. I don't have a summary over here.
I'll pull on my computer for you.
Okay. In that case, why don't we defer the evaluation till I can actually get those. And let's go ahead and start with the strategic plan. Sarah?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I was hoping this morning that we could just have a discussion about strategic plan. I have prepared some materials for you. The materials in the book just really summarize what we have done regarding strategic plan. And I believe those start on red page 3. The most recent strategic goals that were adopted by the Commission were adopted from 2009 to 2012. So we had a 3-year strategic plan. I believe they were originally adopted in 2009 and they were reaffirmed in 2011. Dr. Pritchett really led that effort back then. And then we have gone a couple of years without a strategic plan. So that's why we really need to come back together and decide what our strategic goals are. Yesterday we spent all the day basically on investments, and the strategic plan of course incorporates investments, but it looks at the overall agency as well to see if there are additional things that need to be done, while keeping in mind that our reason for being is the investment portfolio. What is also in your packet on red page 6 are the pervasive themes that were identified in the Funston fiduciary audit. I just thought that that would be a good input for us to consider as we think about strategic goals for ourselves going forward. Also, we had a meeting with staff in early June where we asked for input from them. And we tried to summarize that here on red page 7. Of course, we didn't put in everything staff said, but we tried to identify the major themes. What I was trying to make sure that we did was get input from the ground up, from everybody working in the agency, and I also want to get, information from you all down and try to meld that. I'd like us to have a discussion today. If at any point we feel like we can't make progress on this, or that, we're not moving the ball forward quickly enough, we can hire a facilitator if we need to. I think that we could probably get someone from USC if we need to. I think when the commission originally did their strategic plan, Dr. Pritchett, you all had a resource from USC. Is that correct?
Although he contributed relatively little.
Okay.
But it was pretty much an internal effort.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention that we can do that if we, if we feel like we need to. I've also put in here, we sent a survey to you as commissioners in either December or January, and we asked for you to rank certain items. And we presented those in March. Those are in your packet on red page 9, just for your review. And then starting on red page 11 are suggested goals. And again, I just want to say these are suggestions. These are ways to get the conversation started. I'm not necessarily expecting a vote today. I mean, if we all, really love it and think it's great, we can vote today and adopt them. But I fully expect, that we may need to work on these further. So these were just an effort on our part to get the conversation started. So we can proceed however you want. We can talk about this suggested goals one at a time, or what worked with staff when we met with them was to really kind of have a brainstorming session and get all the ideas out there. So we could do that as well. It's really just your preference of how you'd like to proceed.
I guess the only question I have is, looking at these and these points, seems to me that doesn't this kind of overlap onto some of our other plans, like, the investment plan or asset allocation and so forth? I mean, when we talk about coming up with initiatives designed to meet the actual rate of return, to exceed the policy benchmark and so forth, doesn't that sort of overlap onto some of the other types of plans that we've discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is the one item, one suggested goal that we had related to investments. But of course, there's just going to be a ton of work related to investments because that's our reason for being. And we do have the asset class plans. We, and that's our work every day. It's also very closely aligned with our mission. On the last strategic plan that was adopted by the Commission, execute major investment portfolio initiatives was the first goal. And so maybe I'll ask Herschel, do you have anything that you want to add?
Well, I think that's kind of the tie back, if you will, is that, last time the big initiative number one was actually executing the investment component. And then there were 6, 7, 8 other goals that were more business related, if you will. But this in itself is, well, it's a line item. Everything you saw from that asset class plans yesterday would basically be what's happening under that goal.
Yeah, so these are very broad goals, and what we will have to do, I've given examples of potential items underneath each one of these, but what we would do is go back and add quite a few tasks under each one of them. So
just start on page 11. I mean, I'm just kind of bouncing back and forth between the higher level, the pervasive themes on the tungsten stuff, and then this, that I guess this is the result of the surveys and everything we already completed.
Yeah, I tried to combine all that. I tried to combine the input from staff,
Right.
your responses on the surveys, the Funston pervasive themes, and we looked at the goals from last time. And I tried to meld those together as best I could into these goals. But I don't know if I captured it all correctly, so that's why I certainly wanted to get y'all's input.
So that starts on page 11 and goes through page 16?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you want, maybe I can just talk about each item, and then if you guys have thoughts as we go through, we can brainstorm, or...
I think that's a good way to go.
You want to do that? Okay,
And
great.
as I understand, on each page, the part at the top, the first big bullet would be the plan, and then everything else you have under there is examples. What you're asking us to adopt is a plan, not necessarily the examples.
Correct. It would be, I want input on, are these the right big picture strategic goals for us to be working on? And then I think staff has to go back and fill in, what are actually the tasks that we need to accomplish under each one of those. I tried to put examples in just, to give everybody a flavor for, I know that's big picture and it's kind of philosophical, and so I tried to put some more practical things underneath it, but that is not all inclusive by any means. I think there are a lot more things that we could add under each item, but I tried to make sure that we hit what I felt, what I heard from staff, what we heard from Funston were the big picture items we needed to work on. The second goal is build trust and confidence in the organization. I do believe that that's important. I believe that's important with our stakeholder groups, with the legislature. And one thing Funston said was they qualified that by saying by improving assurance and reassurance. So I think, certainly our internal audit and compliance department helps in that regard. They suggested that we get an outside audit firm to do an agreed upon procedures engagement. I think that could help with the assurance and reassurance. and communication, I think, is very important for us to clearly communicate our investment beliefs, like what we talked about yesterday, our strategies, our performance. And so examples of this, potential action items would be fully develop, a communications plan. Think about what we are communicating, how often, to whom. That could be as simple as, again, looking at our quarterly reports and annual reports. We issue our quarterly reports and our annual reports to meet statutory guidelines. But I don't know, I think we could probably sit down and say, what do our stakeholders really want to know on a monthly basis? What do they want to know on a quarterly basis? What do they want to know on an annual basis? And perhaps develop something in addition to those reports that are required by statute. So I think that's, a potential action item that would be here. I think things as simple as...
Can I maybe break that out?
Sure.
Sometimes I feel like in institutional stuff, we get a little detached from people, right? And in my world, I do have the fortunate thing of I work directly, with individuals primarily, right? And I do think that gets to sort of that reporting or what do they want, and it's not particularly complicated, right? They want to know how are they doing relative to their goals, how much are they paying, right? And how much risk are they taking to get there, right? I mean, those are really the three big, items that you ultimately, so I think in the communications plan and the reporting, right? I mean, you have to kind of know what are those body of questions that people are kind of concerned about. But I mean, most surveys, so I say that I think it'd be helpful both for staff to look at some of these surveys of what do people, talk about, right?
Yes, and so, one item that I have on here is even just talking with you all about what reports do you want on a regular basis? What information do you want on a regular basis? So that would, that would be a little project that we would go through ourselves, just, for us to understand what you need and then us to get it for you. I think we need to do that with you. I think we need to do that with the legislature. I think, quite honestly, I think something that I should do is go on maybe a listening tour with key members of the legislature and just say, what are your concerns? What do you see? What are you concerned about? So that I can understand that and then have that filter back to y'all. And of course, any comments that y'all have from the legislature too, to filter that in so that we're listening first and then trying to provide. And stakeholders, retirees, employees association, the PIBA board as well. I know that, we've given reports to the PIBA board, but I think they're a major stakeholder, they're trustees as well. And so I think we need to listen to their needs and, try to make sure that we're meeting those needs. So I think, in my mind, this goal is a externally focused goal to understand the needs of all of our stakeholders and then work to meet those needs. And I also think that the ERM function, that the audit committee and Andrew has been working on, I think that that could be tied to this goal too, because this is about building trust and confidence. And I think, the more fully developed internal audit is, the more fully developed ERM is, the more fully developed compliance is, and the reports that we get from that, that is an independent check on management. And I believe that addresses the reassurance part of what Funston was talking about.
I think you're headed right down the right path.
Okay.
But, and this is going to get me in trouble, but accuracy in information is a big thing. Travis was put in, and I'm not speaking for Travis here, but I saw it on TV. He was put in a position where senators who work closely with the investment commission said, would it be better for OPEB if the investment commission took the funds and made 10%? Well, of course the answer is yes. But OPEB can't be invested that way, one, because of statutes, but two, if the money came, you couldn't invest it that way anyway. I mean, we don't get 10% in our fixed income. We don't get 10% in our core. So the senators who know that, look at that, and they go, why? And that's a real problem. Those are problems that come back to me on a regular basis. It's just wrong information. And we all have opinions about stuff, and I'll grant that every opinion I've ever had has been wrong. But when we have real facts that go out there, it hurts. And I think that's something we've got to acknowledge.
So,
I guess I would comment on that, I would think our focus should remain on the retirement assets and not the OPEB. Would be my personal thought is that's where.
And, Herschel, I agree, and if y'all made the case that we could figure out how to split the trust fund and y'all can invest a portion, I'm not proprietary about that at all, and I appreciate you saying that. It's not the staff, it's other people in this, and the General Assembly is worse now than it was 6 months ago, for us, I believe. And it probably won't get any better until these kind of things go away. I mean, there's a constitutional amendment that's out there now that didn't pass the House first. But it's based on the whole premise that the OPEB funds could be invested and make 10%. Well, that's a pay-as-you-go. I mean, Travis, this is your baby. But
No, we certainly, PIBA didn't go down there with the intention of saying anything. I was called down there and told and asked a bunch of questions about OPEB. So you're correct, Mr. Treasurer. It's coming from somewhere else, not.
And we'd like to work with you because there may be ways where we could divide that $600 million and I don't make this about OPEB, but it's all part of it. Not only does it hurt the commission, but it hurts this whole OPEB thing. It may be a way that we can get into the trust and that y'all could, or somebody could invest at a higher rate of return in a different way, and still have enough money to say to pay the bills every month as they come in, because it's a different time horizon. But the politics blew the whole thing up. And now I suspect even if we came back with a good plan, there are a lot of people would say, nah, we're not going to do it, you know. So, I mean, I think that's really important.
It's my position, again, I'd just like to reiterate that I hear what you're saying. It sounds like it's coming from a different influence to possibly move those OPEB assets here. But I think before the commission would be able to take that on, we'd want to take a deep look at that. And I think our core responsibility should still be focused on the retirement assets. So as the CIO, before we take on managing additional assets, I'd like to have a deeper understanding of what we'd be asked to do. But
And I'm sure Bob was the same way. Bob had the same thought. He says, man, my mission is, I know my mission. I don't want to get off on something else. But anyway, the way the General Assembly works is they're busy and they don't remember a whole lot, but they remember something is demonstrably false. I mean, everybody's got opinions in the Senate, and it's all, nobody pays attention to it. But when they get something in their hand that's a number, they look at it, and I think it's just very important that when we roll stuff out, it's got to pass a pretty high smell test. And I know that the staff doesn't send out all that information; other people do. But it is something that, from your standpoint now, and your job,
right.
And good luck with it. And if we can ever help you, let me know.
Well, thank you. I believe very firmly in, I want to make sure that the data that we present is accurate and that's relevant to what we do. That's the basis. If we send out incorrect information, that's unacceptable.
Well, it's deeper than that. And I think this is the issue that this organization struggles with, that candidly, when I put on my compliance hat as a firm owner, right? It's not just about the accuracy of information, it's how even accurate information is presented, because you can have factually correct information that when presented incorrectly is misleading, right? Either because it omits important information, and so there's, and obviously different reports are generated for different purposes, right? So they have to meet a different standard, right? You can use things internally, right? And we're in a little bit of a funny situation that, for example, this meeting is largely an internal meeting, but technically it's open to the public, right? So you lose some flexibility, right? I mean, it's a difficult spot in that regard, right? As a public body, that even internal documents effectively are FOIA and, everything else, right? Which doesn't exist. But so I say that inside of banks and investment firms, before stuff goes out, even if it's accurate, it has to go through compliance, it has to check the disclosure elements, right? I mean, that's why every document you get has a full page of disclosures, right, attached to it. I think this ultimately goes back to that assurance and reassurance function, but I think it'd be incorrect just to take away that purely factually accurate information is enough, right? I mean, it gets into how is even that stuff packaged and presented.
I mean,
right?
do we need, thinking of that, I mean, do we need 4 external reports to go through compliance before they're,
I think, I mean, this is something that, I mean, hadn't quite gotten there with Andrew,
Yeah.
but this goes back to ultimately enterprise risk and, audit and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think communications, because they are so important, right? Because they ultimately get to the very heart of that trust issue, and I think that's what the Funkston report about is, assurance and reassurance, right? And part of how do you do that, right, is having, the right controls around the information that gets, and it's more difficult, again, in this setting, right? Because even internal documents become public documents, right?
Right.
So you don't have, as the single gateway per se on that control function, but.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not an easy task, but yeah, I mean, it's
okay,
something.
how about I write something
yeah.
down then? So we'll consider, what protocol to go through. Right, so that could actually be an action item. I don't want to say Andrew has to approve it all, because that might kill Andrew, but.
No, like,
You know?
like a lot of it, like, for example, we have, there are types of communications, right? Okay, is it going to LinkedIn? Is it going to Twitter? Is it going to this or that, right? So not every communication flows through one person, right? But that's where you have a body of disclaimers. If it's this type of communication, it's got to have this type of disclaimer attached to it. If it's this type of investment report, right, the SEC is very exact about what information has to be contained in stuff that has performance level data. Right, so I mean, I think there's ways to standardize it so you don't lose the process and the flow, but,
Okay. So that would be an action item.
I think, yeah.
Just to be clear, I assume there are a specific number of reports that are required to be sent to various agencies, people, and so forth on a regular basis, and that's one set of documents. And then there's just the flow of informational stuff that comes out that's almost rather somewhat discretionary.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would assume there's occasional requests from, different people. Like, I think one of the things, I haven't been as close to it, but, you get requests, I assume staff gets requests for information and they, sort of send stuff out, but there's no consistency. So a different senator asking at a different time might get different impressions, right, on different set of issues, right? And which sounds like may have happened here, not inaccurate information, but just the way the question's asked, what was presented, right? So not necessarily, I think, inaccurate in that regard, but probably the wrong overall impression based on who the question was asked, how it was asked, when it was asked, right? Might have created a false impression is what it sounds like.
Well, yeah, they don't call you down there to get answers to questions sometimes. They call you down there so that the comment can be made.
Right.
And that's where that, and I caveated that answer with, we could get 10% on the 600 million, but it's still sort of an irrelevant number because there's 10.1 billion in liabilities. It's like, let's say I could make 20% on my vast equity holdings. 20% of zero is zero. So it's not going to help you any in the grand scheme of things. But you never know if they're listening or not. So.
Right.
I thought your idea, we kind of talked about once before about having a commissioner's report, so we all looked at the same type of thing. And I bet if everybody sent in what they wanted and staff thought this is what they should have, you'd have a pretty good dashboard that would be helpful and meaningful to most anybody who wanted to see it. And HEK's probably got a good idea about what other folks do with that.
Yeah, so that would be an action item under there too. And I mean, I'd say let's go ahead and do that action item. So if you guys have specific requests of things you want to see, please go ahead and let me know. And I'll work on that. Also, I will get some samples of board reports to give to y'all from other systems, other plans, and Brady, you'll help me with that. And, I'll send that out to you all. So if you want to wait and look at that first and let me know, that's fine. Or if you want to go ahead and just let me know what you desire, we will go ahead and work on that item. And we'll add the, figuring out a protocol for external reports. And then I think too, one thing we should work on is, just being consistent with our reports, so that if we send out monthly numbers, we send out the same monthly numbers every time, that sort of thing.
Sarah, and also it seems to be important that requests for information and all the reports and everything that go out from the commission externally should go out through one source, and I would assume that should be you, and they should be properly prepared, or, obviously before they go out, to make sure if there's any questions, whether they be legal or wherever, but that they are reviewed and that they're consistent. But they should only come from one place, so that we don't get a variety of different people issuing different reports. And so,
The governance policies are a little bit.
Yeah, the government policy would say Sarah and me now and you in 2 weeks.
And in one place.
And Herschel.
And that's right.
Yeah,
I think.
those three, the executive director, the CIO, and the chairman.
Well, is that enough on that item? Do you want to talk any more about that item?
I mean, to me, that seems like a perfectly appropriate strategic goal.
All right, good. Okay. This one is pulled pretty much straight from Funston, saying that, trying to get you all out of the weeds and up into strategy and oversight. So I put this on here for your consideration.
well, as far as that last one, eliminate the commissioner's role in due diligence, we already...
You've already done that. You've already done that, yeah.
I'm just, based on the action items, it doesn't look to me like that one deserves to be a strategic goal. Because the action items are just things we can just do without a whole lot of thought and staff time being devoted to thinking about it. What do you?
Yeah, you can knock that out in an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we feel like we've already accomplished that one, we can check it off the list.
We've already accomplished it. I just
Can
said,
we at least do this, right? I mean, I agree we can knock it out in an hour, but can we at least assign the task, right? Because, back to the calendar, we have a meeting schedule that's been published, right? Can we at least assign the task? Ed, are you gonna take it? You gonna send it out, with, prospective agendas, in advance with staff? Can we at least assign the task?
That's fine with me, because the big to-do in my mind was coming up with a meeting calendar and, rotating those topics and trying to know that, and we'll have to pick a day, but, every June we do strategic planning. Every August we do budget. Every February we do asset allocation. Herschel and I talked about that. I think we even got a draft calendar for that. So, I think that's the action item. Let us solidify that calendar, send it out to y'all for review. And then hopefully that will help us, and then we'll define our meeting dates and at least that base agenda of what the meat of our agenda is going to be every
And do you
time.
have any feel right now? I know Funkston said twice a month or monthly, or, any sort of sense? Because I need to start thinking about that now, like for the fall.
I think they said bi-monthly, so I think they meant every other month.
Bi-monthly is what they said, okay.
Yeah, I think. So, but I haven't looked at the calendar.
Yeah, I think there are certain key dates that kind of force commission meetings to happen at certain points in time, and so we want to make sure we're hitting those key target dates. So August for budget planning, and get ready to submit something for September, and then obviously taking a look at the timing of the asset allocation, SIOP, and then delivering that for the AIP development And so those are some of the key targets that we're looking at, but I think that, roughly every other month meetings will get you there. And of course, I think at least one of those, like you said, needs to be the retreat type.
Okay. Do you all want anything about educational opportunities? Is there anything that we can help facilitate for you as commissioners beyond what we currently do? Okay.
I mean, probably, I can't just pull out of the air what those might be. So, I mean, I think it might be helpful if you said, hey, here's a list of potential educational items.
Well, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, right, I mean, as the organization's gotten bigger, right, there are more and more people we don't even know in the thing, right? I mean, if nothing else, I think it would be worthwhile. I mean, Herschel did a good job of bringing different people up, to speak on their area, but if we as commissioners made an effort, right, in a systematic way, right, to meet the business heads, Andrew at ERM, as this body of reports gets developed, right? I mean, at least systematically through the organization, so that.
Right. So, like education more on staff, meeting staff, understanding their roles and responsibilities.
I mean, it would at least give us all a common body. I mean, this goes back to that issue of rebuilding trust, right? I mean, there's this big organization underneath, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think what you do is could formalize it and set up a regular schedule for commissioners to come in. It doesn't have to be a whole day thing, but just to come in and meet the key people or meet whoever you feel appropriate on the staff so that they know who they are and what they do.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of equate it to the plant tour, right? I mean, this goes back, I mean, it's something that honestly could be applied for commissioners or outside parties, right? I mean, doesn't even have to involve staff time. I mean, you can eventually do it with videos or whatever, right? And I kind of equate it to the plant tour, right?
Yeah, and a pictorial directory would help new commissioners like me learn the names and faces.
Okay.
As I was listening, it made me think, we're presented with a lot of manager pitch books, so creating our own pitch book, if you will, from educational perspective.
Well, that would be something that could help with other external communications too, of saying this is who we, this is who we are. What about external education? Like, I know that there are trustee education opportunities through different organizations. Is that something that we could help facilitate for you all? Are you all already getting access to all that?
We've done that periodically, and it seems like in the past, kind of every other retreat, we've had a trustee type education opportunity. So, I mean, I think it's a good thing periodically to do that, but I don't know whether we need to do that at a retreat or whether that would just be better on your bi-monthly scheduling. Just make sure that one of those bi-monthly meetings includes a trustee discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I know you all have a continuing education. I don't think it's a requirement. You're encouraged to participate in 16 hours of continuing education annually, including in-house seminars, pertinent national conferences. So we can try to hit some of that if we put some of it on the agendas, meeting agendas.
HEK
Okay.
can be of help, I think.
And we can work with you on that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The next one. The next two are ones that are also on the Funston pervasive themes. So I put them on here, to get y'all's input. And I suppose also direction to, try to understand what the commission would like us to do.
I think we need to do both of those.
I think I would say on that advocating and educating the General Assembly, I think it's important for us to build the trust. I think that's an, necessary component. And I suppose education could come with that, but I think the trust is very important in order to accomplish that goal. So I think that can link hand in hand with the first goal that we had.
Well, let me go back to what you said earlier on, that we make an effort to go and reach out to people.
Yes. Yes, and, Ed and I have talked that he and I could both go do a listening tour. He is the new chair and, me as the new executive director, and we'll go listen to understand what people are concerned about.
I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. And then we can feed that information back to y'all. And certainly, I think it's important for everybody to share, what they're hearing as well, so that we can understand how we are positioned. Improving the custodian relationships, Mr. Treasurer, perhaps you and I could work together to understand if there's anything that we could do in that area.
I mean, my office just tries to be, I hate to use the word ministerial about these things, but the problem is we're subject to incoming 24/7. This continued conversation about the Bank of New York settlement. I mean, it's set, I don't know if the staff, if y'all realize this, was the information the commissioners get comes from one source. It's now been put into the PIBA proviso, where PIBA now has to go examine the settlement. And so there's been another conflict point right there. It looks to me like we're going to have conflict points in the General Assembly over budgetary authority, I should say budgetary freedom. And so we're setting up all these conflicts, and then it's blamed on, I don't know what to say about it.
But isn't that coming out of that's not coming from us, that's coming.
Sure, it is 100% coming from you. Senators, listen, if there's anything you need to know, and if I'm wrong about this, somebody correct me. Senators do not go looking for problems, especially in a $25.5 billion budget. They're not looking for an obscure Bank of New York case over $25 million. It's a call celeb because it's been pushed and it's been pushed hard. The problem we've got is we have contractual relationships with other entities, and people look at this. What if you're at the Bank of New York and you're listening to Senator Ryberg on one of his 30-minute rants about this in these meetings? What do you think? What do you do? If you're the next custodian and you're looking at this, I'm frankly a little surprised we even have anybody who would want to be our custodian. But they do stay with us. But that's not organic, Ed. If you think it's organic, we need to have lunch. I mean, it's pushed and pushed and pushed. And we're going to have another conflict point December 1st, this PIBA thing. And it's okay with me.
Well, when you talk about the
PIBA, they
enlighten me a little bit on the PIBA thing.
PIBA, there was a proviso inserted at the very last minute without warning, without writing, without any, it was one of the little things you can get away with in the Senate. I can send you the video if you'd like. They were supposed to talk about one thing, and Kevin Bryant, who did the PIBA stuff, and others, stood up, changed the subject, inserted language where PIBA now has to do hire outside counsel and study the Bank of New York.
That's basically it.
Yeah.
PIBA had nothing to do with it. It
Yeah.
popped up, and we've been instructed that we will obtain legal counsel and study the validity of the Bank of New York settlement and its benefits to members in the trust fund, and have a report.
Sort of the same thing happened to us last year with the fiduciary audit, and it turned out to be a good thing, so maybe it turned out to be a good thing for y'all.
I don't think it will be, because the things are different. The fiduciary audit was always, this group talked about it, embraced it early. We always knew. I mean, I remember very specifically the conversation about the fiduciary audit. It was almost a year coming, and it was the example we used was, hey, this is like having a party. And at 7 o'clock, the party starts. At 6:59, the husband's putting up the vacuum cleaner and the wife is decorating the cake for the last minute. That was the whole point of the Funston audit. It allowed us to tie a bunch of things up without a look backwards. And it was supposed to do exactly what it did. And I don't know, did anybody here regret the Funston audit? From start to finish, nobody did. But the Bank of New York suit, I mean, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have to go out and tell why the money was lost. I can do that now. I never wanted to do that, but I'm forced to do that now because otherwise we've got a settlement without what happened before. And y'all, the proviso was keenly written. We only want to talk about the settlement, nothing else. So I'm gonna spend the next 6 months talking about that because I've got to. I don't want to, but I've got to. I'm gonna put it in context. So we talk about moving forward, but the custodian's relationship, we're constantly under fire, constantly. And this is just another one. And it's gonna bring Alan Wilson into it, the Attorney General. You think he wants to be at election time worried about this obscure little,
All right,
yeah. Well, anyway, I just.
what FEMA has to do and all of that
Yeah.
can really help us and help the commission.
It does, because the custodian's relationship is that. And
Well-
again, the Bank of New York's gonna be under fire.
Sarah, it seems to me that improving the custodian relationship in the light of the fiduciary audit should be focused on what that custodian relationship could be, not how you and the current treasurer can get along better, but improving the custodian relationship to me is answering the fundamental question, should the commission be its own custodian? Should it have control of a custodian relationship? Should that go to PBA? Should it go to the governor? Should it go to some custodian with whom the commission has a relationship that it can make reasonable requests, get prompt action, and accomplish its missions, rather than making nice with various people around the state?
Well, that's certainly one of the recommendations that Funston made. So that's in the laundry list of, potential legislative changes that they recommended.
Well, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but it seems to me that one of the most important things we can do, aside from some of these other things that are somewhat beyond our control at the moment, but just in the everyday working relationship, I would really like to see if whatever problems that we have, it seems to me that reasonable people could sit down and work these out.
And are we having, give me a couple of big problems that we have. I'm just not aware of these problems. I mean,
If there are no problems, then we're a bunch of happy campers.
It's like Herschel's got all these investments. It's his best investment partner. At some point, it's going to be problematic. I mean, the best one we have. And so, there's a lot of moving parts here. So, but again, and I believe you when you say that you think that people things has nothing to do with this board or people in this board. It's exactly where it came from. What I want to point out here and now is that you're looking at 4 or 5, 6 conflict points at the General Assembly and with others. And this office, and Treasurer's office, and this commissioner had nothing to do with any of them. The Senate hearings, nothing to do with it. Knew how they were going to end, knew how they were going to turn out. All that information spewed out there. What good did it do anybody? It just keeps putting a wound into this group. And it'll keep on, but the General Assembly created this group, they can create another group. And at some point, that's what they'll do. They've got one protector in the General Assembly, and as long as he's with you, it's going to keep a lot of that away from you. But at some point, there's a backlash. This whole, the pension stuff, the performance bonus stuff, all that comes from this non-stop political attacks. That's what they are. And I've asked the commission many times to do something about it. The commissioners just be quiet and sit there. But you have at least 4 or 5 conflict points in the next 6 or 7 months when you're going to read about yourselves in the paper. And is that the way we want to go through? I don't see it. But Anyway, I've said enough, I'm gonna say.
Well, other than the PBUT item, what are the others that you're referring to?
Well, I don't think there's any appetite whatsoever to change the custodial relationship away from the treasurer's office. I could be wrong. I'm just one person. I don't think the House or the governor will ever go for that. And so, but that's gonna be a point right there. And when you start talking about it, then everything else we do gets looked at. Everything else we do gets looked at. The bonuses become, whether this big, you start talking about custody, and other problems have become this big. Or other things, investment returns, all those things. And so we set up these conflict points, and we just ought to know it now, buckle down, and that's where the commission's going, just know it. But I don't see the custodial relationship as a hindrance. The big problems we had was where there's the extra signatures. Well, if that's the biggest problem we had, I can live with that, And then we had Private Eye, which could have been bought in 2007 and 2008 and 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, but it wasn't. It had to be bought in that little window where we were trying to settle that lawsuit, which, by the way, we wouldn't have got a penny out of had we gone further, as more evidence came out. And that's what's going to come out, because it's been set up this way. So, anyway, I've said more than I want to say, because I've said this before, nobody ever listens, we just have to go through it. But anything in a procedural way that we have a full-time person, as you well know, she's very good, she respects y'all. I think we have a good relationship on that working part. We're working through on a multitude of really big issues. And if you don't get satisfaction, you let me or Clarissa know. We want to make sure that works.
Okay, thank you.
Because the vast majority of the things we do it's like banking, it's like investment, or anything, it's ministerial. You're pushing papers.
Well, maybe, let's move on to the next item. Now, this is something, I believe this was the first thing that came up with staff, when we met with staff. Not worded exactly this way, but, basically, I believe staff feel like we need technology. And this is something that we've been telling you all for a while, that we need technology. So the goal here is, develop, implement, and maintain robust technology systems and processes. And we put in there, to provide timely, relevant, and accurate data, upon which to make prudent investment decisions. So I wrote it that way because I think, we're a service provider to the investment side. And then to appropriately monitor the investment actions. And my thought here was to tie that back to the reassurance thing, in the trust goal. So not only should we have these systems upon which, we can provide accurate information to Herschel and his staff, but also that we can be appropriately monitored by Monica and Andrew and outside auditors if necessary. Where we are today is, not meeting expectations, but the action items that we have in here is implementing the risk management system, implementing the administrator system, and then the last goal is just something that we can, certainly continue to do, which is complete process improvements to reduce manual work. By no means are those three items comprehensive. They don't include everything, but again, I wanted to give a sense of what do we have to do to move forward. And, this is absolutely key for us to be efficient in what we do. Quite honestly, I'm looking forward to fee validation as part of the scope of the administrator services. So I'm really hopeful that once the administrator starts doing those fee validations, then all of a sudden, I have two whole people that can start doing other things. We can go deeper with fee work. We can have them do operational due diligence. There's just, all of a sudden we have two more people to do work, which is great. And I think that, the more efficient that we can get about these systems, then, hopefully we can free up some staff capacity, to do other more value-added things.
Would you remind me what the names are of those two systems?
I can't tell you on the risk management system because we are in what I hope to be the final contract negotiations, James?
We're there. We have the record of negotiation, which is the final component of the state's RFP process, that we're finalizing with procurement as we speak, trying to get the price exactly where we want it and all of the details within the RFP to meet all the legal requirements and other pieces that we want. And as soon as we get that done, then we'll be on to the signatures and preparing that system. So I hope that we are on the doorstep of getting that done.
So as soon as we get that done, I can tell you the name, but I can't tell you that right now. Conifer is the vendor that we hired for the administrator system. And the administrator system, I did email y'all. I'd like to do some work sessions in July on that if y'all are interested. And we can meet with the vendor. You guys can see the systems, do some demos. So I will be circulating dates on that. Okay, so I guess I'm assuming that we have consensus that this is a necessary goal for us. Okay, all right. Next goal. And I think this is the last one. And this is, so where the previous goal was systems and process oriented, this one is people oriented. So we want to develop, implement, and maintain human resource practices that support the investment strategy and objectives of RSIC and encourage, empower, and direct staff to achieve the commission goals. So I believe as many of you know, we're in the process of hiring an HR director. We finished in-person interviews with HR director candidates last week. It was last week, so we're going to proceed forward with going into the final stages of that, of picking a person. And my intention for that is that, we've had HR, like administrative support before, but we haven't had, like executive level HR. Like, how do we recruit people? How do we make sure that we are directing people the way they need to be directed? How do we make sure that we're managing people the way they need to be managed? How do we make sure they're aligned to the strategic goals, to the big projects that we're working on? And what I am intending and hoping for is that we get a resource with the expertise, with the HR expertise to help us accomplish that. So some other things in this, I think we need to make sure that we're effectively allocating the HR resources that we have. We need to work on recruiting. I think we could use some help in recruiting. And there's certain things that we want to encourage. I think we want to encourage innovation, because that's kind of part of an investment culture, and that's certainly something that we heard from staff, is that they really want us to, focus on helping create a culture and environment in which they can bring forth creative ideas, and, that they can help each other. Some of that is stuff that I think Herschel and I have to do, so not necessarily stuff that y'all have to do, but how we need to organize things on a daily basis. And we need to make sure that teams are communicating, across silos, things like that. Recognizing and rewarding people who are leaders in the organization, of course, is important. Making sure knowledge is shared. And then I think I mentioned this before, but I think what's really fundamental is to really make us successful. We got to make sure that we know what our broad goals are, and to make sure to communicate that into everybody's planning document, so that everybody understands what they're working toward every day is tied to that bigger goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So those are things that I think we need to work on. I do think that the majority of this goal is on Herschel and my shoulders to help make this happen. But I do also think that by expanding the comp committee's purpose to be the HR and comp committee, that the comp committee needs to oversee this, to just have oversight in this area, to make sure that we're doing what we say we're doing and what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, so that's it. Um,
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Before, we had a comp committee where it was only looking at sort of the PIC and then compensation above 150. Has that been expanded to be more inclusive of this, or would we need to take action to sort of broaden that charter, or?
Yeah, I believe you all took action, I think it was May 1st, to broaden the charter to have oversight over HR.
So we already did that.
So you already did that, yes. And, yeah, it was also expanded to make sure that the HR and Comp Committee reviews the implementation of the PIC every year, and then it reviews the PIC plan itself at least once every 3 years, which kind of is going to lead into the Comp Committee report later, because they're going to be, asking you all to take action to help them accomplish that 3-year goal. To the.
It's the HR and comp.
Yeah. So, and I do think that ties into, the goal of getting commissioners out of due diligence and into oversight. So I think that's tying into oversight of, what we're doing with HR. So we'll have to work on, what reports we push up to you regularly, what key items you want to look at regarding to HR. So there, I think there's a lot in this goal, and, a lot that needs to be done, and actions that we're already taking to try to achieve it.
And has that job already been posted? You said you're interviewing now?
We finished in-person interviews last week, so we're in the final stages. And we had a broad cross-section of people sit in on those interviews. So Monica helped us with those, Dory helped us, Jeff and Herschel. So we tried to get, cross-section of the entire organization. Okay, so that's all I have on strategic plan.
Do we need a motion to adopt those, or do you have enough guidance now to go forward and go to the next step and start filling in with goals and objectives and strategy?
I think we probably have enough direction. We can fully flesh it out, and then at the next meeting we'll bring back more meat for you. How about that?
Okay.
Is that? Yep. And so instead of just having examples, we will have the action items that we expect under each item, if that's acceptable.
Is that? Yeah, I think the key objective today is to walk away with the goals for, and recognizing the task that have to be built out below.
But let me ask one more question though. Is there anything big that we missed in this? Or, okay. I will take that as affirmation that we got the big picture things we needed to, and we will work to fill in the blanks on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me return to the item we passed over because I didn't have a hard copy to read from, the commission evaluation for the past fiscal year. As you know, this is the commissioner's self-evaluation of ourselves, and we passed out an appropriate survey to the commissioners. And the grading scale was just like college, or at least like college used to be, 1 to 4, 1 being the worst and 4 being the best. And our overall grade in terms of an average for us was 2.89. In terms of the medium, it was 2.93. The worst category we scored ourselves in was at 2.14, and the best at 3.66. The top 3 questions that we said we did the best on are these. The commission ensures that staff provides new commission members with prompt, thorough orientation. The commission members understand their fiduciary responsibilities related to membership on the commission, and the issues and matters that are presented for commission review and decision-making are appropriate work for the commission. The bottom 3 the things we did the worst on. The commission meets with sufficient frequency and duration to conduct the affairs of the agency appropriately. The commission has achieved the goals and objectives it set out to accomplish during the past year. And the commission engages in long-term strategic thinking and planning. Obviously, every other question came somewhere between those. I have a list of commissioners' comments and suggested areas to focus attention. You remember at the various questions and at the end, we gave each commissioner an opportunity to say something, and we all did participate, and we did say something. Rather than reading all those, I think what I'm going to do is pass out to each commissioner a copy of our comments, unless y'all want me to read them. I'd be happy to read them, but...
Do they get to the level of personnel, individual?
A little bit. No, they don't get to personnel, no. No, these don't, to the extent they get to personnel, I would put a bracket around it and replace the self-identifying words with something else.
I think just pass them out.
Okay. Dora, could you come get these for the across the table commissioners?
I know, big table, right?
Yeah, we used to be able to just hand things across the table. Okay, is enterprise risk management the next thing on the agenda, or am I remembering wrong? No, audit committee report.
Yeah, all right. Talking out the door here. All right, audit committee is going to be a quick report here because, let me pull up my email with all the reminders on it here. Hang on. Everything I'm supposed to cover, so I don't miss anything. All right, so we postponed our second quarter meeting, obviously, to be behind strategic planning meeting to see if, what came out of this. We'll be developing the audit plan for the upcoming year, so we will be meeting July 24th. I believe we have it scheduled. The other big one, the 2014-15 risk assessment and audit plan completion is placed on hold till after this because we want to make sure the audit plan lined up with anything coming out of this strategic planning meeting. Current audits in progress, the investment fees and expenses, they've begun field work there. The annual investment report field work is completed. Currently that's in draft. We are looking at IT risk assessment, obviously, data issues. Deloitte is actually performing that for us. That's one where we do have to go out to get external support. My understanding is Deloitte's completed the work and is drafting the report, so we'd expect to have that shortly. Investment approval and funding, commence planning on that audit. We're replacing a couple of audits with agreed upon procedures. Engagement by Clifton Larson Allen on investment valuation and due diligence. And then Clifton Larson Allen will also be performing the routine agreed upon procedures that the state auditor performs over payroll and administrative items. So those are the sort of activities, and we'll be meeting on the 24th. So other than that, nothing to report from audit.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, Andrew, enterprise risk management update.
Hey, every time I speak in front of the commission, it seems like it's a different topic. I think first time it was due diligence, Deloitte risk assessment, then compliance, and then it's enterprise risk. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to cover this topic. It was briefly mentioned at the last, well, not the June commission meeting, but the May commission meeting, and some of the commissioners, raised some very good questions, like Treasurer Loftus, what is enterprise risk management? What is this function going to do? And believe me, you guys aren't the only folks who are asking this question. In general, enterprise risk management is a relatively new concept, especially in the pension world. I was actually fortunate enough to go to a conference. It wasn't even a conference, it was more of a roundtable with our peer organizations. I think in total there was 13 pension plans there who had an enterprise risk management function. And the folks there, I think, were the best and the bright, not the best and the brightest, but it's the group that we look to as setting the bar high. The CalPERS, the Wisconsins, the Washingtons, the Floridas. So I think we're in pretty good company where we're starting this program. Obviously, we're in our infancy. We haven't gotten to where they are, but we're ultimately going to get there. So what I'm going to try to do is all the enterprise risk presentations and books and online reading I've done, it turns enterprise risk into a very conceptual, theoretical, almost consultant talk speak. And nothing against consultant talks. Nothing against consultants' talks, but sometimes it's hard to apply what consultants are talking about to actual day-to-day interaction and how it's going to add value to the commission. So what I want this presentation to do is, one, give everybody here a better definition of what enterprise risk management is. Two, what is the enterprise risk management department going to perform? Three, what deliverables does the commission want from enterprise risk? I mean, obviously there's some boundaries. There's only one-person staff. I also do compliance. But I want to make this productive. I want to get commission's buy-in. I think some good words of wisdom that Funson gave us, at least on the enterprise risk side, was don't get caught up in the process. He said too many times, not just with enterprise risk, but also other functions, you get so caught up with developing your framework, developing your charter, developing your policies and procedures, and you invest all that time, and at the end of the day, the output is something that management doesn't even find valuable. So we're going to work a little bit backwards, figure out what management, what the commission is interested in, and then try to produce that output and obviously work policies and procedures to ensure that is our output on a consistent basis. And then the last topic I'm going to cover is what are the next steps for enterprise risk management. As you guys know, enterprise risk management was created April 1st by the audit committee. It technically is not supposed to start until July 1st, so this is good. It's a couple weeks in advance. So it's a very topical discussion. I've never used one of these before, so bear with me. Okay, before we get into the really nitty-gritty details, I figured to make it even more applicable, we'd have a discussion, an interactive discussion, about what risk the commissioners see for an organization like ourselves. Putting politics aside, personalities aside, just for an organization like ourselves, an investment-only public pension plan. I'll start off with an obvious one, and if you guys have input, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'm going to be talking for a half hour, which I'm sure none of you guys want. Investment risk. That one is the one that's obviously most topical, and I think most people would say is the most important. That's the one that's covered in great depths, both at commission meetings and both at staff, not just at the investment commission, but at all investment-only entities. But I think you guys are aware there are other risks out there. So what I'm trying to get some discussion is, what do you guys see some of the other risks for an organization like ourselves, high level?
Yeah, I mean.
I'm going to write them down.
Yeah, I mean, this goes a little bit, obviously, I think there's a difference in opinion, among the commissioners, because I think this ultimately does drive some of candidly, the political risk around it, right, is this perception of how much independence, right? Meaning, I kind of equate it to, okay, you're a company and you have a client who's hired you to manage a trust for the benefit of their kids or the family, right? And so you're not an independent entity from that process, right? You're client dependent, right? Yeah. Versus, but I think a lot of, candidly, what the commission is trying to do is to make itself independent of the client, right? To try and insulate it. So it's kind of different approaches to that, in essence, that political issue. Like, one is you just have good client relationships, you spend a lot of time with your client, you educate your client, versus you insulate yourself from your client, right? Because you're a trust company and you have trust powers, and you disregard what they say because, courts aren't going to move it, right? Yeah. But candidly, I think that's where a lot of our political risk, kind of that different perception of, our relationship with, in essence, the client, right? I think drives a lot of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, political risk. I think it's both. We could be influenced by the politics. We get too caught up in the politics, and also we're very at the mercy of the legislators. They could change a rule, change a law that we don't foresee, and we have to make sure that we're staying in front of that. So that's a good one. I'll write that down. This won't take up a ton of time, I promise you. I'll speed it up. Anybody else have any other ones? Sarah, Roberts, any of the
How
commissioners?
about the net liability risk? That, our funding depends on the continued contributions by the employees.
Yeah.
And what changes could come along in our environment that would reduce the numbers or reduce the agencies that participate, that sort of thing.
That's a good one. Put that down.
IT risk.
IT risk, that's a good one. There's the risk there of, one, I guess our IT system's not meeting our needs. Two, our IT system's totally shut down. Then we're out of commission. Monica's doing a great job working with Deloitte. I think it's going to give us a much better in-depth look into this. I can throw out one really quick, operational risk. I think there's operational risk both at, my handwriting is atrocious, I apologize. I think there's operational risk obviously both on site and there's operational risk at our underlying managers. That's why we now have an independent operational due diligence function. That's why HEK also does operational due diligence.
The SEC program around audit risk is much more significant.
Yep, you can have it, call that regulatory or oversight risk. That's a very good one. Anybody?
What about staffing?
Staffing, HR, staffing risk. You have the risk that people are turning over, people aren't happy, people aren't incentivized appropriately. That's why we have a pick.
They're not working on the right things.
They're not working on the right things, they aren't managed appropriately, so that's a good one.
Related to that sanction budget.
What's that?
Related to that sanction budget to pay and retain those people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that almost kind of ties in with, you're at the mercy of politics because there's set our budget, but that also falls in. Okay. I'll just do a few more and then we'll cut it off just so. Legal risk, who said that? Robert?
I did. Selfishly.
Obviously, there's you want to go into that more, Robert, or just briefly the risk that, our contracts don't in line with the state requirements, or our contracts get us into some legal issues that we don't appropriately address some legal issues. Another simple one, or not simple one, obvious one, I think is compliance risk. That we're not in compliance with state regulations, federal regulations. We're not in compliance with contracts, that our managers aren't in compliance with contracts that we have with them. Okay. For sake of time, let's.
You can't forget financial risk.
Financial risk.
You can't forget financial risk.
So as you can see, this is just to show that investment risk, I think most people agree at an organization like us, is extremely important. And we have great resources and we're getting, hopefully a great system through this recent RFP. But these risks sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, sometimes get ignored. How often do we talk about operational risk, HR risk, legal risk? Until recently in the strategic plan, a lot of things were basically an afterthought. And I think what enterprise risk management is, I'll transition, is trying to do basically, is to ensure that all risks are identified and managed effectively in the achievement of RSIC's goal. Truthfully, what we just did isn't a whole enterprise risk management program, but I think it's taking the first step. It's making sure that management, the board, the commission, staff are aware of what risks are out there, that they're documented, that they're communicated, and that they're part of the strategic plan. Every decision that we make changes, I think, our risk profile. Just take an example, is Alan's maybe going more direct into private equity, making direct, taking out the fund of funds. That changes some of these risks, right? That increases legal risks, that increases operational risk, that increases compliance risk, because we're taking that manager out of the middle who was doing all that work for us. Not saying that that's not worth it, but that's something that I think we need to factor in, and I think that's what enterprise risk is going to try to accomplish. Anytime there's a decision, we need to ensure that none of these risks slip through the crack. When we do a strategic plan, we need to make sure they're all addressed. And I think we need to make sure the commission's aware of what our risks are and how we're mitigating it. And there's some risks that you can't mitigate, and are they comfortable, with the risk appetite of where it's at. Ultimately, I think this boils it down really well. What does a successful ERM program do? It answers three questions. Should we do it? Can we do it? And did we do it? I think that's relatively simplistic way of looking at it. Okay. I'll go through this pretty quick. This shows the involvement of an enterprise risk program and how it changes the risk identification process. The old method, it's very departmentalized. You might have folks in our trading department or myself in compliance or folks in our investment operation who they're aware of the risk in their department, but it's a very siloed effect. Those risks might never bubble up. They might be addressing it, but there's no cross communication, there's no communication to commission. What we're trying to do is transition to a future state of enterprise risk, where it's very process focused, it's very standardized, and it's communicated upwards, and this discussion happens. I think sometimes, at least I know even with me with compliance, I get so focused on the task at hand that I miss other risks that might be out there. And having a discussion with Monica, who has a different background and is focusing on different things, kind of brings those risks up. So I think hopefully communication will help us transition to this future state. Here is how I envision enterprise risk department role. Basically, I'm not responsible for risk. No enterprise risk department, at least the way it's structured where we're reporting to the audit committee, is responsible for risk. What we're responsible is for creating a process, an enterprise-wide process that basically provides independent reassurance that management reports can be relied upon. There's some examples further in the slide of some deliverables some other pension plans similar to us give to their commission, just to show you what the output is. These are just some bullet points that I think hopefully just to reinforce the fact risk management is still the responsibility of all employees at RSIC. This isn't me trying to pass the buck or a CYA for me. This is always the way it should be. Risk can't be ever managed by one person or one department. No one person or one department can know what's going on in every single department. So the responsibility and the burden still falls on all employees. It's just ensuring that the communication happens and the risks bubble up. Investment risk is still responsible to the CIO and the investment team and in the investment risk team. That's not my area of expertise. We have people that are specialized in that who know that very well. What we're going to try to do is obviously provide some independent reassurance, not just on investment risk, but on all risk reports. And RSIC and the commission culture must be at the center of ERM framework. I think one thing that you consistently see when you read about ERM is it says management and the board has to buy into it. If they don't buy into it, it's not going to be effective enterprise risk. It's the same as culture. What you hear a lot of times is tone from the top. If the tone from the top is strong, then programs like this can be effective. I'll quickly run through this. So this is the way I think we envision our 3 lines of defense model. First line of defense is you're going to have your risk owners. So here's your investment staff and your back office staff. Second line of defense is your risk monitors, which is myself, the enterprise risk department. You have legal and compliance. Then you also have some departments that do both. You have the risk team and the performance reporting team. They're both risk owners and they're risk monitors. Both of these groups report to the executive director and the CIO, which obviously report up to the commission. The way we've structured our enterprise risk department and our compliance department, but I didn't want to put 2 arrows, was the enterprise risk department reports directly to the audit committee with a dotted line to the executive director. And this line right here is basically the reassurance factor. You can structure an enterprise risk function where it does report up to the executive director, but I think after some good thought and some discussions with Funston and some of our peers, we realized this is the best model. This is the independent reassurance that I think was discussed in the strategic plan. We want to continue to stress the independent reassurance. And the third line of defense is internal audit, which is Monica's department, which reports directly up to the audit committee, which reports up to the commission. And then out here you have, external regulators, which was mentioned, external auditors. You could put in here the state auditor's office. There's always, some factors over here that are another independent check, but they're not. The external audit happens every single year, but the state auditor's office might be. Occasionally external regulators, hopefully you don't see them, at least come to our office. This is from Deloitte. I think this is a great way to show the maturity matrix of enterprise risk. This is just my perspective of where we are, and seeing us right here in this fragmented section, I don't think raises a red flag. I've talked to CalPERS, as I said, I talked to Florida. They've had their enterprise risk programs for many, many years, and they're much more well-staffed than ours, and they're still in about this area. You don't flip a switch. There's no checklist that says enterprise risk management, if you just do these steps, you're good to go and you'll be here in no time. Getting to the risk intelligence where it's risk discussions are embedded in strategic planning, there's early warning risk indicators are integrated where there's, risk appetite fully defined. This is going to take time. So what I think we hopefully will see is this arrow is going to slowly move as we continue to build out this program. And heck, it might have moved over just a tad just from this discussion at today's commission meeting. Here's some sample reports, and I don't need any final decisions from the commission, or nor do I expect any final decisions from the commission today, but what I wanted to give everybody is just an idea of some reports that enterprise risk can produce. This is from Florida. I'll go back. This is from CalPERS, and this is also from Florida. But I think what you're seeing here, and this is one of the next steps for enterprise risk, is identifying what our risk areas are, kind of what we just did. Investment risk, political risk, compliance risk. These are a little bit different. They're going to differ from organization to organization. And then showing what the residual risk is. And doing this on a periodic basis, whether it's annual or semi-annually, and showing trends. Is this risk going down? Is this risk going up? Are you comfortable with this risk appetite? Is this something that the commission's aware of? And they said, okay, yeah, this is, given our resources or given, our investment strategy, we're comfortable with this risk. Or there's some of this risk maybe that we want to address even further, and we want to put resources and we want to put, additional capital and systems in to try to mitigate these risks even more. So I'll plan on talking to all the commissioners and obviously RSIC management to talk about what type of reporting they would like on a go-forward basis. So if you do have time, and obviously I have even more examples, I can give you more examples, but this is just an example of some of the pitch points.
Just to talk about what residual risk is.
Okay, so residual risk is basically the risk that you can't mitigate, is the way I would define it. So no matter what controls you have in place, you cannot mitigate those risks. I call it inherent risk, is the way I define it.
Such as, give me
So there's some investment risk, right? Political risk, I can't figure out what the legislator's going to do, no matter what we did. We can talk to them, we can communicate to them, but we have no idea what the Senate or the House is going to do on a day-to-day basis. We can still talk to them and we can get more involved, but there could be a shift in politics, there could be a scandal that doesn't even involve our organization, and all of a sudden they want to go after us because we're a big dollar item. So there's only so many things under our control.
It is also based upon what resources you have, right? So optimally, you may want to have controls at a level that would mitigate a specific risk, let's say financial risk, but your resources, people, processes don't allow you to do that. So based upon the controls that you can support with your current resources, these are the controls you have in place, but you have risk here. So the difference between is the residual risk, that which you can't meet or address.
I thought it was geopolitical weather.
So next steps, this is the way I envision my next steps, is perform a risk identification, basically develop a risk inventory items, which is kind of similar to what we just did. Sit down, talk with management, talk with the commissioners, talk with staff, and boil down what do we see as our risk areas. Some of them are quite obvious and have been discussed, and there's some other ones that might be specific to us because of current events or whatever it may be. So we need to basically boil that down, and that's also ever evolving. Then conduct an enterprise risk assessment to try to get down to the, what are our risks? Where do management, where do commissioners view them? Funston, in one of the, I think it was in one of their papers that I sent out to all the commissioners, mentioned some questions that should be asked during this risk assessment. What are the major risk areas to our system? Who has responsibility? How prepared are we? You can tell from these questions, just having this discussion, whether you're developing a risk framework or not, these should be questions that we should be able to answer. And we're not able to answer them right now, but in a year from now, Sarah and Herschel, we should be able to answer all these questions. There should be no risk that we don't know about, or at least, it's a risk that is residual and we're comfortable with where we're at, or this is the risk owner. So just having these discussions will help us move along on our enterprise risk development. The obvious one, continue to develop ERM reporting and monitoring, something which I look forward to getting input from commissioners on in the near term, and always staying nimble. I don't want the ERM program, just like the compliance program, just to be stagnant and checklists. It has to be able to meet the needs and the ever-changing investment commission. So That's one thing enterprise risk, there's not a framework where you just go through, check the box. At least I don't envision it to be that way. If you guys aren't happy with the report, tell me, we'll change it. So, that's all I had, so. Any questions? Obviously, I'm happy to discuss any of these topics afterwards, and I do plan to reach out to everybody, just informally to catch up on this topic in the next few months, so.
Yeah, and you might want to just, in case they're curious, we do have examples of these full reports. I'm going to be sitting down with Andrew, kind of go through, some of the ones that look interesting back to the output. So wanted to make sure the other commissioners are aware that we do.
Yeah,
Andrew has pulled together.
Great. But I'm happy to sit down, next time you guys are in the office. I think Dr. Wilder has a copy of some of them too. So, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, Compensation Committee report. Ed?
Okay. The Human Resources and Compensation Committee, known here forward as the committee, met on May 19th.
The rest of y'all.
May 19th, 2014. The committee discussed the compensation policy in general and the PIC policy in particular, and submits the following report to the commission relating to the compensation policy and PIC plan. 1, having adopted the fiduciary auditor's recommendation that the committee annually reviews RSIC's implementation of the compensation policy, and 2, conducts or procures a new peer compensation study at least every 3 years to access the current level of RSIC staff compensation and make revisions to target salary ranges as appropriate. The committee recommends for approval by the full commission that an RFP be issued to obtain a consultant to perform the detailed scope posted on the watch box that will assist the HRC committee in executing the aforementioned recommendation. 2, the committee via RSIC staff communicated to the House Ad Hoc Committee charged with approval of the fiscal year 2014 PIC plan that, quote, as a part of conducting the annual review of the compensation policy and before payment of PIC by RSIC, the Human Resources and Compensation Committee will ensure that actual individual PIC opportunities are subject to an individual assessment in accordance with the compensation policy, Section D, for fiscal year 2014, end of quote. The committee will, in upcoming meetings, focus upon that commitment to the House Ad Hoc Committee. So we have a motion. The Compensation Committee recommends that the Commission approve the issuance of an RFP in accordance with the scope as outlined and posted on Watchbox.
Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Does that conclude your report, or you still got more?
That concludes my report. If anybody has any questions. Thank you.
I think this would be a good time for the morning break.
Yes, good.
Now let's turn it over to Herschel and his team for the investment report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today my remarks will begin with the investment beliefs component, as we had a long discussion about the beliefs yesterday. I think there was a lot of good feedback, and I was happy to see the commissioners actively engaged in that dialogue and putting out ideas. One of the things that I would like to do is have some more time for staff to pull in all those recommendations and digest them again, as opposed to put it on a hurried track, if you will. Staff will circulate draft 3 to the commissioners in the coming weeks once we get some of the final audio tapes here to make sure we're capturing all those ideas that were put out there. Second, I wanted to give you an update on the BlackRock transition. You'll remember the commission had hired BlackRock as a passive global equity manager. So we're in the process of converting the synthetics to physical securities. That has actually been done with Russell. And today is the trade date for the fund with BlackRock. And then Friday will be the settlement date with the fund. So what happens on Friday is that instead of funding in cash, we will be funding in kind, where those shares will actually transfer from the transition account currently at Bank of New York to the fund itself. Then the next Monday, we will go back through and have that fully reconciled to make sure that all shares have transferred appropriately and the value is being reflected appropriately as well. So that's the $2 billion figure that we'd send out an email and communication on last week as well. Next up in the legal queue is we're still working with SSGA to finalize those contracts, and that's the other global equity manager that the commission had hired as well. So once we finalize that contract, we would expect the same sort of exercise to happen as well. I want to give you some updates on where we're at for the fiscal year 13-14 from the annual investment plan. There are a few key objectives there that we continue to work on. One, we had updated, or Mr. Phillips had updated you last time that as far as the transition goes, we were right there. We had a few redemptions in place with some of the hedge funds. That's been completed. So the hedge fund total target is, or maximum limit is 15%. And that has been brought back in line. That is now at about 13%. And again, that's looking at hedge funds across the entire plan. So the hedge fund low volatility target is 8%. But again, we can use other directional hedge funds in equities, credit, and other places. The global equity and global fixed income, we've been moving those to more pure global mandates. It was part of the last year's plan. And we've made significant progress there. We will have a couple of global equity manager recommendations on the enhanced indexing type strategies to come in September. With the global fixed income managers, we anticipate a manager or two to be recommended in September as well, with some guideline changes for one of the managers that we actually spoke about yesterday in September. Also based on conversations here at the retreat and thinking about the investment beliefs and strategic plan, I think there are several key things that I will have for consideration, and thinking about organizational structure and the best way to align that structure to capture or be aligned with the investment process and the asset class assignments. So we'll have some minor tweaks on that coming for you. From a hiring position or hiring of open positions, we still have 4 remaining unfilled positions that we're going to continue to recruit for.
What are those?
For private equity, credit, and research. With that said, where we're at too is with some of the resource constraints. I believe that's prudent for us to take a look at some outsourced solutions for several asset classes as well. The first that would come to mind would be thinking about private equity as a potential area where we would take a look at certain managers or strategies that we may not wish to continue with on a go-forward basis, and possibly outsourcing the oversight to that, or to that part of the portfolio. That's just an example. It's not what we're necessarily planning to do, but it's an example of the types of things that we would be looking at. The key benefit there is that would reduce the burden on staff for certain responsibilities with respect to the number of managers being covered right now. So on a happier note, the estimated performance through fiscal year May 2014, the plan is up 14.5% and the policy is up 13.5%. So we're back in double-digit territory with a month to go. So we'll see how the rest of June treats us. What
have been the big areas of strength?
Still equity markets.
Okay.
Still equity markets. That's the big one. And our credit portfolios, our hedge fund portfolios continue to perform well. So hedge funds are up 9 or so % as well. So that's a significant number. But relative to equity markets,
that's interesting. I think in the respect that if our hedge funds are up, did you say 9.5? Roughly
about 9.5.
Because in general, a lot of hedge funds have been either in negative territory or, very low single digits. Mm-hmm. So apparently our managers are doing better than most. Or a lot.
I will attribute that to the staff for their manager selection skills.
Having said that, I think the staff deserves a great pat on the back.
So with that said, and with that question about performance, and we do have a detailed performance review that I would ask David Phillips to walk us through. One of the things you'll probably notice is that this review is getting thicker and thicker as we're adding more and more to this with some of the activities coming out of the research team itself, as well as the risk team as well. So with that said, I'll turn it over to David as he's getting the slides in place.
Performance update first. Yeah, this is the deck that we'll go through. Okay, I think you'll recognize most of this content. There's a few new pieces, but just run through kind of my standard message here with updated numbers. Comments are focused on fiscal year to date, so the 9 months ending on March 31st. Slide 2, as usual, this is our policy benchmarks for reference. Mr. Giobri, part of your question is what's the market giving to us, what's doing well, both absolutely in the market and our plan relatively. So we start with here. You'll note that all markets are positive year to date, some more so than others, and fiscal year to date. In addition, there are very few negative numbers on the multi-year periods here, which is here recently is the first time we've seen that almost across the board. The red is just the fiscal year-to-date column ranking that we usually highlight. These are our reported numbers. Focusing here, as usual, on the top box, the plan as of the end of March returned 11.2% versus a policy of 10.74% for 46 basis points positive relative outperformance. As Herschel mentioned, that has widened since then. Net benefit payments just over $750 million through the end of March. And then just getting a little bit more granular to Herschel's roll forward performance update. In April, we added 116 basis points to absolute performance. May estimate was 2.01 or 201 basis points in addition. And then through June 6th, we had internal estimate of 17 additional basis points. So that adds up to fiscal year to date of 14.99% as our estimate, our best guess at this point. Okay, and that's through June 6th. So that was the most recent that I had.
Do you have a policy benchmark?
I don't for the yeah, actually I do. Reynolds, bear with me a second. See if I have that for the same date.
End of May, it was 13.5, so if you probably add a few basis points to that,
13.8, very close, Herschel. 13.8. 13.8 is a policy benchmark estimate through that's actually through 5/30 is what I have. Okay.
And ours is 14 point what?
14.99.
Pretty good.
Excellent.
The highlighted categories here are the adjustments for the overlay allocations that we have in certain asset classes. On the fiscal year to date, the main impacts are the equities and commodities categories. The overlay on fiscal year to date, again, has had a positive impact across all categories. Slide number 5. It's our standard exposure report. No significant changes to report to you here from the last two times at the top level. I think I would refer you to the asset class plans as being a more pertinent display of this that we went through yesterday. Slide 6. Very top level categories here, fiscal year to date net benefits versus the net benefits paid versus approximately $3 billion investment performance added fiscal year to date. The Plan value exceeded $29 billion for the first time in, I guess, ever, at the end of March. Value added by asset class categories, approximately $1.3 billion from the global public equities. And then if you aggregate several of the alternative categories that are next in line, there's approximately $1 billion from the alternatives, which would include the hedge funds that Herschel mentioned here just now. It would also include the private markets components too. So the two combined, global public equities and broadly alternatives, $2.3 billion. Less contributions, obviously, with the rate environment from the fixed income components. And as expected, the smaller allocations are not adding as much to the plan level by design. Slide 8, side-by-side plan categories versus our benchmarks. I think I'll just jump to the next one, which is the net of these bars. So relative returns, private markets are the extremes at both ends. Private equity being behind its benchmark and private debt being above. In both cases, issues with the actual benchmark match and the timing of the returns there. So there's a lag piece there. Those things will kind of self-correct and normalize. This is the overlay composition, and Herschel just gave you an update that significantly impacts this chart, as well as the subsequent 2 or 3 coming behind it. In the last few days, over the last week, we've transitioned roughly $2 billion to the BlackRock allocation, which is the half of the global equity allocation you see on this chart here. The other half is to come in transition with the State Street allocation coming later. Same info, just broken out a little bit more granularly. No significant changes in terms of the asset class allocations or the instrument types. Again, the global equity category is now dated, and bar is roughly not quite half as big as it is now. Or going forward will be about half as big as it is now. No significant changes through the end of March as well on the weekly monitor. This is something we provide mainly for you guys. We do monitor it internally, but it's something to give you the confirmation of stability, if you will, in the overlay program. So no significant changes. Again, we will see a major inflection point here reflected the next time we put this in front of you.
All the charts in this section, year-to-date through March 31st?
Fiscal year to date should be. Fiscal year to date through March 31st. This is a long-term perspective that we started providing. This cumulative value. We anchored this chart. I think we mentioned this last time. We anchored this chart at the end of June 2004, and we're just going to continue to expand the right side of it as we go forward to maintain the long-term perspective. A couple of numbers. We are approaching a 70% cumulative return from June 30, 2004. You'll see that the green dot here, somewhere between 65 and 70% cumulative. We did exceed $29 billion. I think it would be interesting to note too that there's almost $9 billion added to the plan from this low point, the blue, which is $20.9 billion to $29 billion in the last 5 years. So in the big scheme of things, pretty nice recovery. So going back to some line item detail for you, the public markets, highest and lowest contributors, strong performance from the very large allocations on the left, which we always like to have confirmation of that. Lowest contributions, you'll note in the red on the right, are all still positive. They are red because they are the lowest, but they are all still positive, so not necessarily a bad thing. The 6 largest line items are emerging market related, both emerging market equities and emerging market debt in this category here. Sticking with public markets, the largest allocations, all above 1% of the plan. All line items are positive here as well. The lowest performers on this chart, again, they're all positive, which is a good thing, but the lowest performers are emerging market related and fixed income related. So both areas that that the market in general, investors in general, have struggled with. Switching over to private markets, we continue to provide, as you recall, we changed this to a multi-year perspective. So it's a 3-year contribution as opposed to the fiscal year to date that we provide for the public markets. All but one are positive on the whole chart. So again, the red is red because they're the lowest. There's only one of those that are actually negative. The smaller allocations show disproportionate contributions. So I think if you'll look on the positive side here, we got a lot of smaller actual average values here across time, but you look at the very strong double-digit numbers, and you'll see that I think even more so as we jump over to here.
Give an example.
I'm sorry? Okay. So the point was we got a number of small allocations, in the double-digit market value category. So Crestview, Pantheon, 89 million, Warburg's 90. Here's an extreme. Industry Ventures is a $34 million allocation, but it's produced an annualized return of 27%. So you're getting a disproportionate return from smaller allocations, which you would hope to see that in a very granular portfolio, which we have in the private equity and private markets group. If you recall from Lewis's presentation yesterday, we have something in the range of 50 or 60 line items in this in this bucket, and that is intended as it is now to stay the same for his pacing schedule going forward. So I guess what we're looking for is that even though we are making the portfolio a little bit more complex, having to deal with more balls in the air, if you will, more line items, that effort is paying off. And you expect to see that with, if you can make the argument that we're taking higher risk with smaller firms and therefore smaller allocations, we get the payback that commensurate with the risk that we took for it, which show up here in double-digit returns over a three-year period, for example. Does that help, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
So this is the top 20 largest allocations in private markets. Again, a portfolio has a lot of line items. Only one is negative. As if looking at an annualized 3-year return, only one allocation of the 50 to 60 line items is actually negative. I'm sorry, only one allocation of the top 20 is actually negative, not of the 50 to 60. Let me correct that. That's significant.
When I say that Apollo private equity line item, I have to tell the commission, a great source of pride is that part of our money is what saved the Hostess Twinkie.
Just what South Carolina needs to help itself. Fry that sucker up.
So a couple of new exhibits here. You'll recognize some of this from the risk management framework that presented, I guess it was March 13th. Is that right, Herschel? Yes, that's when you were at March 13th commission meeting. So we'll start including the risk side of the equation in the performance update on a more formal basis going forward. So this is a risk monitor we showed. You'll note the dots here, since we just started this recently. This is done weekly. You'll note these little dots. These are the real-time observations that we're starting to track each week, and really whenever we need it, we'll be tracking these numbers. So this is at the end of March. We've got a lot more dots on the most current one now. But you'll notice that with those dots, we are tracking well below our self-imposed risk limit, which is the 11.77% red line here. So that's a function of portfolio design and also of the markets being extremely low in volatility at this point. Okay.
Going back to the strategic plan, it seems to me, Sarah, that would be, that kind of data would be interesting for the public to know about with our periodic reporting.
Can you go back there just a second? Sure. Only because I think this kind of brings up, I mean, one of the questions that we were talking about a little bit last night, right? I mean, obviously that's being driven what's going on in equity ball, right? But if we have sort of a target risk limit and we're below it, right, then the question comes up, are we potentially under earning, right? Or, so are there other risks we do want to take where we do think they're compensated, right? Not necessarily more equity risk, but commodities or something else. I mean, do we want to,
Yeah, I think that's a fair point in thinking about how we would actually allocate and be able to get that exposure. I think that does start to take a look at where more volatile asset classes to actually increase the volatility, if you will. But then also the concept of leverage, of where would you actually add leverage to the plan, if you will. And if you think about that from the context of a Bridgewater perspective, they're going to leverage the bonds to push up the volatility, which I know we have limits on, or restriction, I should say, on actually levering at the plan level. But that's an area that I would agree we could take a look at. Are we comfortable having less volatility than what that risk limit is? And how does that actually look relative to the plan itself, and having a fairly low tracking error back to the plan, but trying to be positioned where you can actually have active bets to generate a higher return than the plan. So my thought is I would be pretty comfortable staying closer to where the benchmark is, if you will, with respect to the amount of risk in that policy, as opposed to overreaching. But it's a fair point that we could take a look at pushing up volatility in other parts of where we're comfortable at, maintaining a certain threshold, if it's 12% vol or what have you. But I think that.
My memory as to what that
Sure. Yeah. Let me just remind everyone, I think, to put this in the perspective in which it was developed. The red line here is not a Markowitz optimized risk for return type of line. This red line is a threshold where we cross into drawdown territory for some period of time. So it's an absolute plan level limit that we really don't want to approach. Now, is there room to go in that direction, and possibly produce higher returns? Possibly is the answer to that, maybe. But the real exercise there is going back to what HEK primarily does for us. You'll see those in the expected return numbers at the top, 6.9 and 6.57, where you model asset classes over some horizon and combine them together to produce the most return for the least risk. So it's really two different perspectives. We thought it was important to have a perspective of an absolute floor. This is what our absolute tolerance for losing money, if you will. We defined risk as losing money in this category. So that absolute floor is this red line here.
And that figure is the same as on the asset plan allocation data that we adopted. Is that correct? I'm wrong about that. 10.57.
Oh, the volatility, that's what is the...
That's the result of our current asset allocation.
For the policy, correct.
Yeah, but I think as Alan was speaking about too, so for instance, within global equity, we have the small cap tilt, but over the past couple of months, we've actually reduced that tilt, so we've actually taken some of that volatility out of the equity component to it. And so you're going to see that show up in the numbers. Also, we've had an underweight to emerging markets, which is one of the more volatile asset classes as well. So that's why you're seeing some of our volatility numbers lower than where the policy would be. But those have been more active decisions to take those tilts in the portfolio as well. So I think that's the other component to it. I think you may be getting to this next, but is it? Sorry, from
At the extreme right end of the green line, is that 3 dots?
There are, it looks like 4 dots right there. There's 2 that are kind of overlapping right at the top. So there's 4 there now. Again, we do this on a weekly basis. I've been a little bit handicapped because my risk manager's been out of the country for the last 3 weeks, but we have, more real-time history now.
I guess maybe I'll ask this question. I think it ties in where Alan was talking about as well, is that, our approach has been using mean variance optimization, and you come up with a target asset allocation, you put bounds around it. So there's so much risk you could add to the plan or take away within those ranges, if you will. With that said, shifting that dynamic or that paradigm of thinking about the world, would you rather manage to a pure risk target as opposed to allocation targets?
Just along that line, we're doing some work now on a value at risk type of framework, which would get to give you the numbers, give commissioners, commission the numbers to start to approach that kind of decision. When you're managing to a risk target, then you're running the risk, if you will, of missing that target or the target being wrong for whatever reason, and you need to know what the implications are of that. That's moving towards more of a an investment bank type of approach to managing gap risk, overnight risk, balance sheet risk, that type of thing in real time. But I think it's something we can provide for you. It'll be helpful additive perspective for us, regardless of whether or not we use it as a primary policy. It'll be helpful information to every one of you here. Rebecca, did I cover what you needed? That risk presentation, it was in the March commission meeting materials.
It represented a drawdown that took you picked a certain year that we could recover from it, and I thought it was like a 5-year recovery.
It was 5 years. It was set to be, okay, so the technical answer to your question of the actual number, it was set to be 0% cumulative return over 5 years. So the drawdown happens and then you come back out of it.
Okay. Even after 5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This is a component of that same report. I just blew up the exhibits on this report to corroborate, if you will, what you guys are used to seeing, which comes primarily from the Goldman Sachs risk report. So here, this is our internal estimate of risk allocation on the right, and you'll note that 65 to 70% of the equity risk shows up here, versus the global equity allocation of 40% on a capital basis. So intuitively know that. We're actually quantifying it, tracking it, monitoring it, paying attention to it. So this corroborates the Goldman Sachs risk report, and we'll get into a few slides from that now. Part of that report spreads the risk across 5 of the most important highly correlated factors, or specific factors for our plan. The most recent, the March 31 report from the Goldman Sachs team measured the equity risk factor as almost 80%. I know this is hard to see, but it's 78.9% of our total risk. If you were to spread it out over just these 5 factors, 78.9% shows up as an equity-specific risk factor.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
On that one, I don't know if Goldman can do it, but I think, everyone kind of looks at the 10-year, right? But obviously the Fed is most impactful on the short end with QE and stuff. I mean, I assume they can run or give you some sort of estimate of sort of that impact. I mean, that's I think the real rub of the risk, right? The assumption everybody has is that it's going to affect the 10-year, right? But we know it's going to affect sort of that, that short end the most. I mean, have we thought of, have they quantified that at all? I mean, there's sort of an implicit assumption that the Fed will change the 10-year, but that may or may not be right.
I think they're picking I'd have to go back and double check this, but I think they are picking up a little bit of that change from the slope of the curve component to it, but not necessarily purely focused on the front end. But we could ask them to go back and take a look at, if you do get, that kind of a rate rise early on, which could force you into quick flattening before you go back steepening. So we can take a look at that.
Yeah, that's absolutely something we can do. Part of the routine in this report and this analysis is to actually reconfirm that the 5 factors we're using are the most important 5 from the database of all factors. So they do that by routine for each production, and so that's not directly showing up as one of the top 5. But through that same process, you go back and say, run it only on this specific factor or this specific market metric, and essentially a scenario or shock analysis type of analysis. So we can do that. We absolutely can.
These, did you just say that these are the top 5 risk factors?
These were the most important risk factors in a statistical sense from the database that they're drawing from all Goldman Sachs determined risk factors.
I missed a couple of those. And what's diversification?
Yeah, and we'll clarify that one way. Not necessarily on a standalone basis would any one of these be the most important by itself in terms of top 5, but when you combine them all, it's an optimization type of thing. So these are the top 5 when combined risk factors that we can explain as much of the risk of the portfolio as we possibly can.
And diversification benefit?
The diversification benefit, when you switch over to the total or the absolute numbers instead of on a percentage basis, basically what you have here is a plug figure, if you will, to give you an estimate of the diversification impact that you're having from the different risk exposures. So ideally, I think in an ideal world, which we're not going to get, we'd probably move closer to it, but ideally that risk factor would offset, the diversification factor would offset the positive risk that we have overall. So, ideally you would have perfectly negatively correlated 2 asset classes. When one goes up, when one goes down, the other one goes up, and vice versa. So it's always not having everything go down at one time. Okay. Oh, this is slide 21. Also from the Goldman Sachs risk report, you can see the numbers here in the highlighted section, the yellow. We have decreased exposure to credit and rate factors over the last 9 or so months. And this was by design. It was due to change in asset allocation policy, number 1. And 2, we had an overweight in the mixed credit category, which was the credit risk factor that you see up here. So we have been systematically reducing that mixed credit category, which is primarily hedge funds in high performing credit strategies over the last 9 months. So the numbers confirm the change in risk profile that we needed to take, that the market would dictate that is prudent over the past several months. So just to end up in the last few slides here on some market observations to round out the exposure and risk perspectives that I've provided. The equity markets, Alan, to your point earlier, in the earlier discussion on volatility, the equity markets were volatile during the first quarter. And just to take you through, I know this is a little bit busy, but these are, the red is, the red dotted line going across is our policy equity benchmark, the MSCI ACWI. The blue line is the emerging markets, MSCI emerging markets index, which is a component of the ACWI, but I've pulled this out just to show you where the sources of volatility came from and then what's happened since. So as you recall, the emerging market exposures and the performance contributions was systematic, if you will, across emerging market equity and debt as in terms of weakest performers on our portfolio. So you see that show up here. The ACWI, our policy benchmark, in the first quarter had a drawdown of 8.6%, and then it recovered. Let's see, help me find this. And then the emerging markets subsequently, okay, I'm off, sorry. The blue line, the emerging markets first quarter, blue line dropped 8.6%, okay? The ACWI, on a little bit of delayed basis, the global markets dropped 5.6%. So we had global markets exacerbated by, and possibly caused by, emerging markets weakness drop in the first quarter in the first month of the year. So this is all in January. The subsequent recovery then you saw in the dotted line here, which is the global markets, the developed markets, because the emerging markets did not participate with it, the developed markets recovered very strongly, 7.2% in the beginning of February of this year. The emerging market recovery did not happen, begin to happen until early to mid-March. This is March 14th right here at this point. And the emerging markets recovered by almost 9%. So we saw a couple of hills and peaks and valleys in the first quarter of the year, which goes back to the emerging market contributions that we noted in the performance on our portfolio earlier. Subsequent to the first quarter, so this is March 31st here, when markets have generally recovered, you've had basically an up and to the right type of pattern with very low volatility over the recent 3 months, or over the 3 months, over the last 2 months of the quarter, so 1.5 months of the quarter. This is the second calendar quarter of the year. So apologies, it's clear as mud. This is the second calendar quarter. This is the end of the first quarter here, and this rolls us forward to year to date, basically on the global market, global equity markets. So the point being, early in the year, very volatile, number of concerns impacting markets. Focused primarily in emerging markets. Markets recovered. We've had stable expectations, stable markets, positive returns since then. On a year-to-date basis, the markets are still in the single-digit territory, but the volatility is very low, and that's showing up in our portfolio as well as in a lot of the hedge fund portfolios, having very difficult time finding alpha in that type of environment. The only other thing I would add to what's happening here is that as we came into this year, the correlations across markets, across asset classes, actually decreased. So the opportunity set to add value, the opportunity to add value by asset allocation improved as we came into this year, and that showed up in some of our policy decisions we made. But what did not improve, going back to the volatility piece here, what did not improve is the dispersion within asset classes. So, stated differently, in all of equities for the second half of the second quarter, calendar quarter, it didn't matter so much in stock selection. You just needed to be in the market. So, from an alpha perspective, the hedge funds find that as a very difficult environment to add value above and beyond what the index is giving them. Okay. A couple other snapshots. Again, low equity volatility, just to put the numbers around that. Current level, 10.7% versus the average. This goes back to 1990. Confirm that, yep, 1990 here. We're at 10.7, and the average in the green is 19.9. So roughly half, 50% level of historical volatility over this time period. It's fairly extreme. It really is. The other thing I would highlight for you is the low premium for taking credit risk. We talked a little bit about that yesterday in our asset allocation plans, our asset plan discussion. So the average here, again, going back to 1989, is 5.3%, and this is a yield over the Treasury, 10-year Treasury, spread over the 10-year Treasury, 5.3% average versus a current. We can either accept a 10-year Treasury or take what would be a disproportionate risk to pick up 200 basis points. Okay. And then the last observation, this is the equity risk premium. We do this internally. This chart is one component of our market dashboard. So this goes back to 1974 for our internal exhibits. And you can see the gray bar, or the gray area here, the equity risk premium is positive. The longer-term perspective from Bloomberg data goes back to 1965, so we're adding roughly 10 years onto the front end of this. So again, over multi-year period, you're seeing still a positive equity risk premium. The obvious question then is what's causing that? Is it on the surface? Is it on the surface, it looks very attractive to take that equity risk premium. So that takes you to the next levels to look at the components and the reasons for that being in a green territory, if you will, on the Bloomberg chart here. And that's exercise we do regularly now internally as well. I would say that the part of the reason that this is in green and has been in green for so long is that the spread component of this, the yield, which you subtract out of the earnings yield for the equities, is extremely low, back to the low interest rate component that you mentioned, Alan. So it is distorted. How much is open for discussion and analysis. But as it is, equities are one of the few, if not the only, areas where you would say as an asset class, you are getting paid more for the risk that you're taking than the other areas, thus justifying our weight in the equity component. So the equity risk premium, Mr. Chairman, is calculated by taking your earnings yield, which is the inverse of your PE. You take your earnings yield minus your 10-year yield, U.S. Treasury yield. So that yield is low, is lower now in this time period than it was in these time periods. These is 1970s and 80s. So that 10-year yield was closer to double-digit territory at times there, and here it's in the 2.5% range.
Okay, so you're saying the source of the distortion is the current Fed policy?
Possibly, yes. Okay. That's all I had, unless there are any other questions.
Those are very interesting. And the additions you made are fascinating, really.
Some point, just bear with me just for 1 second. I'll go back to where we were on the slides anyway when I walked up. We had this for reference mainly for yesterday, but it didn't really get into this kind of detail into kind of market observations and where we are in the cycle and that kind of thing. But at some point, I think it'd be worthwhile for either me or Herschel or have our analysts come in and walk through this deck with you. And I would encourage you to do that, on your own time as well, since it's in your materials. Let me just jump back. Yeah, please. Thank you, James. So this is something that Justin, who presented pieces of this yesterday, and as well as the commodities asset class plan, he's kind of taken ownership of this. He does great work. He's a great analyst and produces this for us whenever we need it updated, but at least kind of on a quarterly type of basis. So this was our most recent iteration. You saw this was the economic cycle. This is contributions to the cycle from a data perspective. So we break out. You see across the middle here, payrolls, consumer confidence, mortgage applications, that type of thing. What's interesting on this chart is, we talk about the recovery and the challenged recovery that we've had since the depths of the recession. This red component is jobs, unemployment, I should say. Let's see, non-farm payrolls. So the red's non-farm payrolls. So you see the steady additions of jobs coming across quarter to quarter all the way through here. And yeah, I think that's been an overlooked, it's been much talked about, but an overlooked piece of the overall pie. There's a bigger issue around employment situation, but in terms of this, it's been a consistent, steady contribution. I don't want to get into this now unless y'all want to. It's a pretty detailed discussion, but this is another perspective on the economic cycle. So we had this one before that we talked about. This one puts it in a different context. Basically, this is saying that over here, if you look at the quadrants, expansion versus contraction, the most recent observation on a purely data perspective is showing us that we're at the verge of contraction. So again, that's food for thought. It's not a conclusion. It's just a data input for analysis. And we go through market conditions, business conditions, financial conditions, leverage, some specific components, rates and spreads, all of these things. This is interesting actually. So asset yields on trailing 8-year data versus the volatility. What you'll note here is the dot in each one is our current yields. So on a yield basis, almost all asset categories here as you go across the spectrum are below their historical average in terms of what they're yielding now. So going back to being in a very challenging market environment to try to achieve the 7.5 or higher number, when that number is actually based on much higher historical numbers going back. So, and back to the volatility, very low volatility across the spectrum as well in relation to their historical ranges. So these are, Justin mentioned some of these yesterday, commodities versus equities, gold versus bonds, commodities versus bonds, and gold versus stocks. So giving us perspective of the correlations. I mentioned that in my remarks that the correlation parts of the equation changed recently. You'll see the decrease going to 0. You go into 0 here and popping back up and going to 0 here, and the same here. So across asset classes, it made the impacts of asset class policy decisions much more important. So I just highlight that for you, something we can go into. Sorry for the diversion, but we can go into that much more detailed and constructive discussion on markets, whenever we want to do that. Okay. Thank you, guys.
So, Mr. Chairman, next on the agenda will be the HEB integrity memo. Right here, thank you. And what we want to do is give an update. Back in January 2011, Integrity was acquired by Munder. There was you had to change the paperwork of who you're signing accounts with and so on and so forth. Munder is actually a portfolio company and one of our private equity managers. Also, Victory Asset Management is a portfolio company and the same manager. Victory has purchased Munder, which means Integrity has now been purchased once again, and so we're requesting the ability to, repaper, if you will, the documentation or reassign the account under the Victory name, if you will. We still think very highly of Integrity. They actually like the deal themselves, so we anticipate that there's going to be continued continuity to their investment process, the team. We have not seen any warning flags at this point in time that would make us wish to divest from Integrity. But it's going to be a reassignment of the account. Robert, make sure I've got that stated correctly.
Integrity continues to manage.
Integrity will be the manager, and that team will manage the assets. It's the ownership structure of
Mr. Chairman, there is a motion in your packet.
It's,
The second
last
page.
one, I think, isn't it?
I believe you're right.
Do we do business with integrity now? Do we do business with integrity?
Yep, right, we have $357 million with them currently, and that's their track record.
What's that?
All right, the motion is on this bullet A at the top of page 2 of the motion. Do I hear a motion that we adopt the recommendation of CI? As stated. Is there a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Nays, I'm sorry, nays say something? No nays. So we own some of the buyer and some of the seller?
Well, actually, yes, we do. And so it's now being rolled up under Victory, so.
So we own them and they work for us. Good. What's next?
HUK review.
Oh, yeah.
So, one of the things that is part of our guidelines is to actually do a review of our consultant, Hewitt Ennis Canop. I've asked Ashley Aslan to take on that responsibility to review from a contractual perspective all the different things that they're responsible for and to give us an update on that. And I know she's been in contact and communication with Brady as well as Suzanne. But we wanted to give the commission the update, and I've asked Ashley to lead that discussion as well.
Hi, I realize this is the last agenda item, so I'll try to be quick, but still it's an important item, so I want to give it the time it deserves. Just a kind of overview of how we kind of got here. The high points, the commission selected HEK to serve as the investment as the consultant in 2012, in September. October was the effective date of the contract. September 30th, 2017 is the end of the current contract period, but then note that it can be terminated at any time with 30 days written notice. So HEK has been our investment consultant for a little more than a year and a half. It was reasonable to assume there would be a ramping up period in which to get required reports in place and get things scheduled. Now that we've done that, we think that this is a process that we can monitor on an ongoing basis, but also provide a performance report annually. So as I said, in the interest of time, I'm going to not go over this line item by line item. Obviously, if there's anything, you can read this. If there's anything you'd like to discuss, either formally now or later, certainly we can. But I'm just going to kind of go through on an exception basis and point out areas where we had to get things scheduled or things that needed extra attention, because by and large, things are in order. So I'm going to skip to page 8. This, well, the requirement is that they review and evaluate the portfolio. As you can see on the bottom, which I skipped, of the page, they are required to provide investment manager composite and plan-specific performance. What this was a comparison between the basically how do our separately managed accounts compare with their composite accounts. This was something we hadn't asked HEK to do. We decided that we did want to ask them to do it. They did it, and actually between the time we posted this and today we received it. So we've been in receipt of the report. We've also scheduled this to receive it every June. So this is an item where we've said that's trending to target, but now if we were to redo this, they would have a check mark, and then going forward, we expect to receive the report. The next item that we looked at was they were required to report the rates of return, both reconciling with the Bank of New York and maintain it independently using their own system. So this would require them to calculate performance two ways. So as background, the Bank of New York closes its books a certain number of days after the end of a reporting period, and any statements or information that's received after the Bank of New York closes their books are updated and applied to the next period. As background, NEPC used to leave the books open and wait until every statement was in, and then they would calculate performance based on that. Then there was a time where staff asked NEPC to stop leaving those books open and then reconcile with the Bank of New York. And so it went from where there were two numbers where NEPC did not reconcile with the bank, and then later on, NEPC reconciled with the bank. So I think this requirement in the RFP came from that. At the end of the day, really the performance management measurement system at HEK can't calculate performance both ways. You have to choose one or the other. And so we have asked HEK to reconcile with the Bank of New York, and so we've given them just a deliverable, not started and deferred, not meaning that they're not doing something, just that we're not going to ask them to do it. It can't be done. And as a note, when we get up and running with Conifer, we'll be able to see performance whichever way we want. Conifer will have the ability to leave the reporting open until all the statements are received. So the next area we focused on, review and evaluate the portfolio. They are required to review the risk exposures for the entire portfolio, including asset class, sector, geography, and currency. This was just an area that we thought the reporting could be a little bit more robust. I think we're all aware that there is a data gap, and we're working to bridge that gap. The performance highlights that HEK provides includes plan level attribution, the asset composition in the quarterly reports includes sector, geography, and currency analysis for long-only assets. As we get on board with Conifer and we get enhanced reporting, HEK will be able to also enhance their reporting as their data, as the data gets better. So we should be able to see enhanced reporting out of there. So we said that's trending to target. We're working with them, we're watching, and we should see some improved reports as we have better data. The delivery of annual reports to the Commission, there's a laundry list of items that they are required to provide 70 days after the end of the fiscal year. They get a trending to target because they were a few days late last year. They have promised us that this is on their calendar, and we will receive it 70 days after the end of the fiscal year. And so we expect that to be, and we've been in open discussions, and there shouldn't be a problem this time. They get a deferred for the net of fee performance report because that's something we don't ask them to provide. The Bank of New York provides that for us. And so, again, maybe the X means just something that we haven't asked them to do or we're not going to ask them to do. The next item, conduct service provider searches, so investment manager searches fall into this category. Manager profile to the CIO, I think this was also from the times of NEPC. NEPC provided a search book that profiled managers from a focus placement list of investment managers. This is something that HEK does through informal conversations with staff. If we wanted a search book, they would certainly provide it. They provide it to other clients. We haven't asked them to do it, and our process is working now. So, but if any staff member of Herschel, anyone of you guys wanted a search book, they have assured us we could provide it, but we haven't asked. So, so it's just a different process that wasn't picked up in the RFP. In addition, perform national background checks on key persons through manager selection. There was some back and forth about which managers and the level of detail that was going to be provided in background checks. Staff made it clear that we expect background checks on key personnel for every investment that were funded during HEK's tenure. We have a plan in place to receive these, and they're being backfilled. We have been assured that they will be received by the first week of July. So we have a plan in place to get that on track. The next item, provide access to manager research tools, systems, and databases. Bloomberg, eVestment, Zephyr, in the RFP, they said that we would have to that they were not going to provide these, so they don't provide them in their contract, and so it's not actually part of the contract, so that's why that is not applicable. And so overall, we think HEK is doing a very good job. I think this was a beneficial exercise. It allowed us to prioritize some reports, to get some reports we weren't receiving. It also put some scheduling guidelines around things. There's some reports that we've received that we've now put on a calendar to receive at certain times of the year. The tracking error chart, there was the manager due diligence chart. We've put some deadlines on that so that we can receive it by March 31st and September 30th each year. So all in all, I think this was good to have the dialogue to go through. And as I said, we intend to do a formal review on an annual basis, and also we are monitoring the relationship on an ongoing basis. So hopefully that also met your timing and attention span expectations at the end of a very long meeting. So if anybody had any questions or anything you'd like to discuss, please let me know. All right.
Thank you, Ashley. That's a good way to semi-finish. Is there any further business to come before the commission? Anybody have anything you want to bring up? I don't have a gavel with me, so I can't pass it to Ed, but it's not time to pass it to Ed anyways, but I'll pass it in about 2 weeks. But anyway, this is a good retreat, and enjoyed it. I think I learned a lot. I hope we all learned a lot and made some progress.
One last thing, I think that the investment results are really outstanding, and staff, I mean, we had a lot of help from Federal Reserve, but having said that, I think the staff deserves a real pat on the back for doing a really terrific job in making sure that the investment results are as good as they are. So we'd like to thank you.
Couldn't agree more. Hear, hear.
So, well, there's certainly a lot of people in the office, and one of the things I wanted to do, and I appreciate your time as well, to allow them to come and speak to you so you can actually have more interaction with more of the people, and to see some of the staff members that you may not see very frequently, because I know that they all love what they do and are certainly appreciative of the opportunities as well. So thank you.
Do I hear a motion that we adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Lunch is at 12, checkout time is at 1. We adjourn.
Good meeting.